Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, today in the morning, Venkat sir messaged that videos will be available only till first week of April.
Yes, yeah.
I had requested him to extend the validity because even archaeology and even physical we started a bit late.
Right.
And Neo stencil it was mentioned 240 days as the validity.
Okay.
He said he'll get back to me.
Sure. Yeah. Just mention with him. With the physical part, definitely I think those parts that we have done in the end, I'll give you access later as well. Okay. So don't worry. Just we'll work together on that. So you do mention because we have to come up with some strategy. I think sir had come up with an idea like that. So students know that, especially for overall students who joined early, taken classes early, they know what to expect from it. But I think we have a bit flexibility on this. So don't worry. We stay in touch and you let me know and I can provide this as per that.
Sure, sir.
Okay, right. So yesterday we started with the unit 1.5, right? And we discussed few aspects of primate taxonomy and the primate characteristics we discussed about. We also briefly started comparing, various characteristics between apes and humans, because in the exams we have seen questions being asked on comparison between humans and chimpanzees, for example. So those type of components that we focused in the last class. I think in the comparison part, we went till discussing different specific categories, right? So now what I'm going to do, we're going to complete it by talking about the remaining component. Because in yesterday's class, we compared many of the features starting with the skull to the feet, correct? So if you follow that approach, it would be much easier for you to pick important points. So many important points. I'm going to give you a couple of tables to make it easy for you, as I was telling you, where chimpanzees and humans, what are the specific characteristics that have changed over a period of time. And those, I think, for the conceptual understanding, I've gone through the pictures and explained you those components. So today we are going to first focus on differences with respect to the genomic analysis. What does the genomic analysis karyotyping studies are indicating with respect to the molecular level differences? Okay, otherwise anatomic differences that we have focused on. So for molecular level differences, I would ask you to look into this textbook chapter I shared with you yesterday. So in the Stein and Rowe's primate characteristics and comparison, we have a subtitle called comparative cytogenetics. I'll highlight what are the key points that you need to know related to this. So here, as compared to how we went superficial morphological differences in apes and us, here we are looking into the chromosomes, number of chromosomes, for example, how genes are organized on the chromosomes. A brief idea, because this won't be specifically asked, but this will be part of your explanation on comparison between the humans and the apes. Okay, so we all have an idea about number of chromosomes in humans. We have 46 chromosomes, okay, in Homo sapiens, and 46 chromosomes that we have. And there is a variation in number of chromosomes in primates and us. I think I remember showing you briefly, I'm not sure whether I did, but yeah, humans, we have 46 chromosomes. And whereas many of the apes, like chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, they have 48 chromosomes. They have 48 chromosomes, just 2 chromosomes extra. So we have 46 chromosomes and there are about 48 chromosomes in chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Okay. And you notice that there's quite a bit of variation. Some gibbons have 52 chromosomes. Some gibbons have only 44 chromosomes. Baboons have about 42 chromosomes. The Indian monkeys that we have, langurs, also have 44 chromosomes. So what they clearly explain here, the chromosome number is not necessarily consistent with the taxonomic group. So it is not giving us any picture about how different we are. They say that some very different organisms may have same number of chromosomes and very similar organisms may have very different number of chromosomes. So the chromosome number is not the right criteria to look at. So keep that in mind, but we just mentioned that humans have 46 chromosomes where several apes have about 48. There are cases where some of them have 44 or 52. So there is a variation in number of chromosomes, but it has been indicated that chromosome number is not a good reference point to look at. Okay, so you mentioned there is a variation, but it doesn't reveal too much about the differences or similarities. That is what they talked about here. White-handed gibbon has 44, another one has 52. Okay, so what are interesting to mention here? So the most important thing that we need to mention here, I think one particular point I would like to make here is the comparison of DNA sequences or DNA similarity comparison that you can give. DNA similarity comparison that we can give. So when we compare chimpanzees and humans DNA, human chromosomes, okay, in addition to the number where we have 46 and they have 48 chromosomes, we have high degree of similarity. There's high degree of similarity in our chromosomes. So what we notice here, as per the karyotyping, they have done karyotyping analysis and compared chimpanzees and human chromosomes. Okay, but although there is a difference in number, chromosome number, there's a high degree of similarity in their appearance. Their appearance and organization of genes seems to be very similar. Very similar. Very similar. One indication is that, which is not mentioned here, that DNA similarity, sequence similarity. How much? So you write sequence similarity is about 97%. We have 97% similarity. When we compare our genome with chimpanzee's genome, there is 97% similarity. About 97% similarity. So 97% similarity. Okay. And chromosomes are homologous, meaning you see very similar genes in chimpanzees in us. They're homologous. You find same genes in the same locations, the corresponding locations. So chromosomes are homologous. So they show a lot of features, including position of genes on chimpanzee's genome and our genome. So what technique do we use to identify the gene location that we studied in 9.4? Gene mapping. So gene mapping studies have revealed that homologous genes are being found in the same position on human and chimpanzee chromosomes. So gene mapping like techniques would reveal it. Genome sequencing studies, gene mapping, karyotyping, these type of studies were done to compare apes' genome and our genome. So what does that mean? What is it indicating? It is indicating that we probably have, or it is giving an evidence that we all have common inheritance. We have common ancestors connected to that. That is why we have so much of similarity. So genome sequencing studies have given us better insight that how similar are we to these apes. Okay, but of course there are also some differences. Some differences are there. What are the differences, key differences between them and us? We have one pair less, right? Number of chromosomes, if you see, we have 46 chromosomes, they have 48. So we have one pair less chromosomes in us, one pair less. Okay, so instead of 46, we have one pair less. So 2 chromosomes are less basically. And also, there seems to be inversions in some chromosomes. We notice inversions being present in some of the chromosomes, different from chimpanzee's genome. Inversions. Inversions. Okay, and remember, we are talking about similarities. We're not talking about identical nature. We are not saying that we have exact same sequences in our genes. We are saying we have same genes, but they may not have exact same sequences. What is the difference? You call it nose, it doesn't matter. No, all humans have noses. Correct, but the nose shape, size of it, dimensions of it may change. It's like that. We have same gene, meaning its function is related to the same component. Maybe it is related to blood clotting, related to blood groups, because we also share blood groups with them. They say that our blood groups are compatible with many of these apes. So we do have a lot of similarity with them. So what are we noticing here? Here we have a lot of components that are similar. Okay. And we are also noticing that these components may not have, like genes especially, may not have exact same sequences, but they're part of the same function. So that is why we use the word sequence. We don't use the word identical. Identical means it has to be same sequence. There are mutations. Some analysis have been done. Several genes have shown that about 19 to 20 positions are different, sequences are different, but still they participate in the same function. Okay, like that we do see quite a bit of similarity with the chimpanzee's genome when compared with the humans. And chimpanzees are more closer to us compared to the other apes. If you see in the phylogenetic tree, I've mentioned to you that chimpanzee is placed close to humans. Okay, so this is briefly about the genomic comparison, a cytogenetic comparison. Okay, I'm going to provide you a little bit of idea on brain. How are the brain developments different? Okay, but let me do that in the factors that related to human evolution. Factors that led to human evolution. So in a way, some overlapping points that we have discussed yesterday, I'm going to put them together with the factors in human evolution. So 1.4a, they have given factors in human evolution. We kind of talked about those features that have evolved in us. So we have to discuss biological factors as well as socio-cultural factors that led to human evolution. So this is one question that is also coming in the exam. Biological factors and evolutionary factors in human evolution. So let's talk about that. So this overlaps with what we already discussed yesterday. So this is component of 1.4a, but ties into what we have been discussing already. So what are the different biological factors in human evolution? So what led to the evolution of us? Okay, the most important biological component here is erect posture and bipedal locomotion. Starting with these type of apes, which were quadrupedals. They were quadrupedals. They were using 4 limbs to walk. Till then, to our ancestors who could slowly get up, show upright posture. This we'll see in the next unit. Where did that happen in our ancestors? To a modern man or even our ancestors who could walk straight. So quadrupedalism to bipedalism. Excuse me. So humans started walking on 2 limbs, on their 2 feet. They become bipedals from quadrupedal ancestors. What might have led to this? why humans start to walk on 2 feet rather than just using 4 feet as by the apes. There must be different factors here. Like first of all, survivability. So when we lost the sense of smell to the extent that they were present in the other animals, okay, and of course our ancestors like apes, for example, they were living on the trees. Apes, of course, as they become heavier, they started living on the terrestrial areas. Yesterday we were talking about those adaptations related to the arboreal adaptations. But what happened, because our vision has improved, we could see further enough. But if you are actually crawling, you don't get a better view, right? You cannot see further enough when you are crawling. The height at which you are able to see things will be lower. So what had happened, eventually the idea of standing up and seeing farther enough had become a necessity. So standing up would provide us a better view because eyes developed, right? Smell cannot reach farther enough. So what we were actually attempted to do, there was a concept of a need raised for standing up so that we can get a better visual about the dangers that we may have, right? Predators, that if you're looking towards the predators and protect yourself from them, standing up and seeing farther enough is very helpful. So there was a inherent need that developed to stand up. So a need was created. Natural selection was moving towards this direction in a way, if I have to say. So the benefit of standing up is getting a better vision and protecting from predators. So increases survivability. Plus, so one survivability angle is protecting ourselves from dangers because they were living in forests. So there was a lot of danger associated with it. So they had to survive. Standing up would have provided them benefits. Second point is food, availability of food. Being able to see things farther enough, identify the potential food had become possible through standing upright. Excuse me. So, but this doesn't happen just because of your interest, correct? We have seen that like giraffes started stretching their necks and received long necks. It won't happen like that. Enough changes have to take place for generations together. So what had happened? Yesterday we discussed about this comparison. So changes happened in our vertebral column. Compared to the apes, our vertebral column had received or adopted a shape of S curve. So multiple curves, something that shows up S-like structure that you see here, this S curve can be seen. So humans, starting with the skull, remember you mentioned all those components that we discussed yesterday. Starting with the skull part, how skull is positioned for allowing bipedalism. You have to discuss these biological changes, skeletal changes that happened in us. So you talk about how is foramen magnum, how is the head balanced on the vertebral column, head center of the head balanced on the center, foramen magnum shifted to the center, right? I was showing you an image, so similar image here. We actually connect the vertebral column here towards the center. So human skull has this, chimpanzee skull has foramen magnum at the end, towards the back, and wolf and other animals have at the end. So their face is attached at the tip. It's like this for them. Whereas for us, we attach it to the center. So you mentioned about these changes, how foramen magnum is shifted to the center for right balance or fine balance of the body weight. And then you talk about vertebral column, the S-shaped curvature in the vertebral column. I was telling you it's acting like a spring. It acts like a shock absorber. Okay, so that our body weight can be balanced very well. So these are the things that we discussed, but you can also discuss them or explain them with respect to the factors that led to human evolution. First, I told you the need and necessity or benefit of standing upright. But to support this concept, lot of changes had to take place. So what are those changes? We're talking about changes in the skull, changes in the vertebral column. Okay, I'll come to the face part as well. Vertebral column. And changes in the pelvis also we discussed yesterday. Changes in the pelvis. Okay, we discussed that. You can also mention about changes that happen in the pelvis. We talked about how like a broader and round our pelvic regions are, our pelvic inlets are. Our pelvic inlet is broader and round. Whereas in gorilla, chimpanzee, orangutans, it's bit elongated, provided enough room for baby deliveries. Okay, but there is more restriction in humans. We already discussed the details about it, right? Female and male pelvic differences. But here we are comparing that with the chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorilla. So basically, we are comparing it with apes. So in comparison, in characteristic comparison, you can talk about it. Also, what changes have happened in us to become what we are today. For that, also you can mention about changes in pelvic region. Excuse me. So you can connect these components to two things. What made us two? Because pelvic region or inlet had become narrow. Although it became broad and circular, but overall size has decreased. So do you think the faces like what apes had, can they fit into this pelvic region? So if we had maintained the same head shape, skull size, do you think we would have maintained that? It wouldn't have become possible for us to come through this broader and circular pelvic inlets. So what had to happen? Facial changes had to happen as well. So in order to allow to be delivered through this modified versions of the pelvic regions, facial modifications have to happen. You can put subheading facial modifications. Okay, position of the skull we talked about, vertebral column we talked about, curvature in vertebral column, pelvic region differences you can mention, and also to fit into that modified pelvic region or newly adopted pelvic region, face had to undergo changes. What changes had happened to the face so that they could be pushed through this smaller inlets? Can you point out to me that we discussed yesterday? Facial characteristics and primates to apes to humans. What changes have happened? How different are we from apes to us? I'll show you an image for a bit better understanding.
The jaw, protruding jaw moved back.
Look at the face size from our ancestral species to us. So the protrusion is gone, the prognathism is gone. Of course, within human races, you may find in some of this, but this protruding jaw is gone. Faces are not that big anymore, and they are flat. So prognathism, reduction in prognathism or protrusion, more flat faces can be seen. More flat faces can be seen. Reduction in brow ridges. We don't have as big brow ridges as apes have and our ancestors have. Our brow ridges have also decreased. So you can talk about all these components that we discussed. So flat face, you can mention about how forehead, we have forehead that are flat compared to the receding foreheads that you may see in our ancestors and in apes. Receding foreheads you see in them, whereas our forehead drops pretty fast. Of course, within us, females and males, we have a little bit of a difference, but overall, our Foreheads are flat. Brow ridges are small. No prognathism. Do you see the logic here? So changes had to happen to face in order to accommodate the face during the delivery process that comes through the modified version of the pelvic inlet or adapted, newly adapted versions of the pelvic regions. So this facial changes had to take place for that. Okay. Excuse me. In connection with this, I'm also going to talk to you briefly about brain changes, changes that have happened to the brain over a period of time. Okay. This I'll put into the context of cultural factors. Okay. I will explain that in the context of cultural factors, but be familiar depending on the question. You can also mention about our brain got expanded. The size of the brain, the cc of the brain has increased from about 150 cc approximately in apes to close to 1300 plus 1400 cc. They may variable numbers that you may find, 1300 plus cc that we may find today. So that also expanded. Why is this? This is to allow a lot of coordination. I'll discuss that in the context of cultural factors, but this allows a lot of coordination. We became more intelligent with the help of that. How? I'm going to tell you that. But to finish off the skeletal changes, you also in the factors discuss about the way our feet are designed, which I've discussed with you in detail yesterday, right? So also mention about them. Like humans, in order to walk, we lost the opposable toe. So chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, differences that we have seen. So from them we evolved, right? They carried because given that they are quadrupedals, they had this opposable toe, but we lost the opposable toe. This opposable toe is gone in us, and it aligned with the other fingers. Toe got aligned with the other digits, and the flatness and curvature in the center, stiffness in the center. You can talk about these factors which led to bipedalism. Bipedalism is the key aspect that we have to focus on for explaining human evolutionary factors. Okay, so mention about these skeletal differences, starting with the head and toe. These are the key differences which led to human evolution. These changes made what we are today. More specific differences can be picked up, but these are sufficient for our understanding.
So this is one of the biological factors, erect posture and bipedal.
Yes, posture and bipedalism is one of the factors. Along with that, we talk about all the changes in connection with each other, facial modifications, and all different components. As I said, head to toe explanations that we have to give. Plus, what we need to discuss about is the brain, changes that have happened in brain to coordinate all these activities. Plus, some cultural factors. Okay. Yesterday, we also talked about changes that happen in our teeth, because if you have a bigger teeth, you will have bigger jaw. That would also let not happen the flatness that we require, right? You can also mention about changes to the teeth as well, right? Yesterday, we were looking for that diastema, right? So look how well these canines are actually put together. They lock each other basically in this. This has reduced because this is what allowed us the face to become more flatter. Changes in the teeth, remodification of teeth can also be mentioned there. So we talked about this component yesterday, and size of the teeth decreased. Changes in the arms we discussed yesterday. Okay, now let's focus on the cultural side of it, cultural aspect of this. So we cannot completely distinguish cultural factors to the biological factors. There is some overlap that we notice here. But if you have to explain it, let's say that question is mostly emphasized on cultural factors, then what do you write? What aspects we have to look into? Here, I'm also going to connect to the changes that have happened in the brain along with it. So what have we noticed? We noticed that our brains are definitely much larger than the apes' brains. Our brain's size has increased. Complexity in the brain has increased. Okay, before getting into the details, I would like to briefly show you a couple of basic components of the brain so you can recognize what I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm sure you probably are aware about three major parts in the brain. In our brain, we have four brain. Majority of this region that you see here, gray region that you see here. So this is our forebrain. This is where cerebrum, cerebral cortex, thalamus, hypothalamus is there. So majority of our brain is forebrain part. Okay, this all surrounding region, big region, is our forebrain. Okay, and then if you come towards the bottom of the brain, towards the center, you notice midbrain. So as if if you put your hand into the mid of the brain, you will find this part called midbrain. So middle part of the brain. The whole surrounding part of the brain is forebrain. The middle part is called midbrain. And the bottommost part here towards the neck, which gets connected to the vertebral column or spinal cord, that is called hindbrain. It is called the bottommost one is called hindbrain. This portion is called hindbrain. Three parts. So like that forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain regions that we have. This is just to follow general understanding. Class 10th NCRT. Science book talks about this. Okay. So we have these three main parts. And of course, I don't think we need to get into the details about all of these specific components are there where sensory system is built. But few highlights I'm going to give you in order to see where did these differences come from and how culture and our behavior has influenced it. So for this, I would like to refer to this Stein and Rowe. In the Stein and Rowe, they have specifically talked about changes that have happened in our brain. Okay, few highlights I'm going to give you here. Make a note of that. So few points I've highlighted here. So the evolution of the brain. We are evolution of the brain. They also talked about forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain part here. Now we have a picture of what we are looking at. So if you see the evolution of the brain, so our human brain allows for the complexity of our behavior and culture. Lot of practices that we have in our culture and behavior, they influenced each other. Like what changes have happened in us probably had been influenced by our practices, our needs, influenced or put pressure on brain to develop in certain manner, they say. Okay, what are those factors? I'm going to talk to you a little later once I explain what changes have happened. Okay, and brain is what makes us most distinctive from other animals. So Homo sapiens, humans, show huge amount of distinction to the other animals in the form of changes that have happened in our brain. So in the context of changes happened in the brain, we are very different, or a lot of differences can be seen from other animals. Okay, but some of these parts are already developed in other vertebrates, other animals that have vertebral column in them. So like sometimes we notice that they have simple primitive brain structures are found in some of these animals. Okay, later they became to have three parts that we talked about: forebrain part, midbrain part, and hindbrain part. These are also found in already other vertebrates. So providing the basic structure of vertebrate brains. So it is not just unique to us, unique to apes, unique to us. So even before primates, these basic structures have formed. Okay, so they already had enough connection, right? Like for example, forebrain part we talked about, front brain part we talked about, within where we also have what is called olfactory bulbs for olfaction, smelling. These bulbs are already created in vertebrates before becoming primates. So olfactory bulbs in the forebrain part has developed already. And in the midbrain part, optic lobes for vision. In the midbrain part, optic lobes have developed in vertebrates. I'm telling you what were already developed and how different are we from them. So eventually I'm going to introduce the differences that we developed over a period of time. So I was telling you olfactory bulbs in the forebrain part, optic lobes in the midbrain part. These are centers which control various different sensory systems in our body, like smelling, vision, etc. Okay. So also we develop the vertebrates developed what is called cerebellum. Cerebellum you probably heard about. Cerebellum is our motor control unit. Motor control unit. So cerebellum already developed in vertebrates. So what vertebrates already had? These three sections and olfactory bulbs, optic lobes, cerebellum. So from the image, if you want me to point out, this region, this additional component is cerebellum attached to the brain. It is called small brain. Lot of nerve centers are here. Lot of neurons you find within here, like an additional brain. It looks like it is cerebellum, which is meant for coordination, muscle coordination. So motor coordination. So they're also developed in vertebrates, other vertebrates. And eventually what happened? Eventually, after the development of these things in the vertebrates, as evolution continued in early reptiles, cerebrum got enlarged, the cerebral area, the forebrain part got enlarged. And an area called neocortex appeared. Neocortex. So this is a gray region of the brain we normally say, right? White brain, gray brain, or white region or a gray region sometimes we call. So this is a gray covering of the cerebrum has formed. So gray region has developed in reptiles already, neocortex it is called. So it's a gray covering on the cerebrum part. So what is the role of this neocortex that is newly developed? It is responsible for coordinating various impulses. Because sensory systems were developing, we are able to sense a lot of things and coordination was happening within the neocortex. So slight shift and better coordination has started because previously for sensory system in the midbrain, they had optic lobes. But now what happened, the neocortex kind of took over that job. So even before primates, we are talking about three major parts are there. Specific sensory system got developed, but it was improving further with neocortex being formed in the reptiles, which was dealing with coordinating various impulses coming from the sense organs. So it's kind of the cerebral cortex area took over those sensory functions. So these are the changes that were already there. This is what the status. So what else had happened in us is next question. So these parts were already there before giving rise to primates. Now we are going to see how primates are different from already existing brain structure. So what happened in primates? How our brain developed from them? So increase in convolutions, increasing in foldings. You hear about that folded region in our brain, right? In the frontal lobe, in the cerebral cortex region. They say that better they sometimes correlate number of foldings to the memory because we don't have a complete understanding of brain. We still have many gaps in it. But overall, in general, we say that convolutions are important for memory, right? And functioning of the brain. So we notice that increase in number of convolutions. So thereby increasing the surface area. It's like foldings. In our biological systems, we have a lot of foldings. So it is the same, it is actually a bigger area folded into smaller structures. So they don't take up too much space, but it has a lot of area. It increases the surface area. So more space, but fit into the smaller skull. So many convolutions, increase in convolutions, increasing the surface area of the cerebral cortex. So in Anthropology, that old world, new world monkeys, we find this change, increase in convolutions. You see in the image here, the cerebral cortex, you see a lot of foldings that already started to develop in Anthropology, which were absent in the other animals like fish, reptiles. They don't have these foldings. Mammals have some of them, but they increased from mammals to us. You see these foldings, cerebral area. Excuse me. So one quick change that we notice here is number of convolutions have increased in Anthropology. And also, overall, I think you can make a mention here in this particular point. A general increase in the brain size relative to the body size happened. They had bigger bodies and smaller heads and smaller brains. But relative to the overall body, we have bigger heads. Relatively, we have bigger heads. Proportionality of the head to other parts of the body has changed, because other animals have much bigger bodies and smaller heads. Our body size has decreased relatively, but head size increased. Accommodated better brains or more complex brains. Okay. So general increase in the body brain size related to the body size is one component I wanted to notice. And second, what specific areas have changed in us? So as already telling you, sense ability to sense has decreased. So the changes have to happen in the brain, right? Areas of the brain concerned with the sense of the smell have undergone reductions. So reduction in regions responsible for smell. This is one change you see in the brain. Relative size of the brain to the body has increased. Certain changes have happened. What are those changes? Brain regions responsible for smell has reduced. So reduction in areas responsible for smell. Excuse me. So decrease in smell, ability to smell through changes in brain, and increase in areas associated with the vision and the touch. So increase in complexity of areas associated with the vision and sense of touch. So enhancement in the vision and sense of touch. Those changes can be seen in the brain, the corresponding changes. Okay, you can mention. And if you're interested, the next thing I would like to tell you related to this in the cultural aspect, the overall increase that you notice. So various cultural components, like there was a pressure to make tools to survive. We had to make tools to survive. Okay, and to acquire food, to acquire food. And second thing we notice that with respect to the need for a language, need for communication, till there was not elaborate communication. We don't know whether they would communicate, but communication seems to be existing to a lower level, to a simpler level, but more sophisticated communication had to develop. Why? Because let's say you figured out how to design a tool, right? Unless you inherit this idea to the next generation, this knowledge will be lost. This knowledge will be lost because more complex tasks that we are able to perform, that knowledge has to be passed on to the future generations. So better communication, need for better communication has arisen. So we could make tools, we could communicate the tool making process to the and hunting and those abilities to the future generations. For that, need for communication has arisen. For that, language became a necessity. So this tool making abilities, language, and other human characteristics of cultural characteristics have affected the evolution of brain, or pressurized, or put pressure on the brain to develop in certain way. So language has developed, and changes that have happened in our excuse me, voice box. Changes happened in our voice box to speak, to say specific things in a specific manner that others can follow. So associated changes have happened in our other parts of the body, including in the voice box. But the related changes had to happen in the brain, correct? So you specifically see here that cortical areas associated with hand coordination. Couple of areas in the brain has changed. So far I talked to you about smell and vision related changes, right? Now I'm adding changes with respect to communication and coordination. So one thing that you notice here, we have better hand coordination compared to apes. They say that we have 3 times increase or change in the cortical areas responsible for this. In the cerebral cortex, the area responsible for hand coordination has increased by 3-fold compared to apes. So the cortical areas associated with hand coordination increased by 3-fold compared to apes. So this is another change in the brain, but we are putting in the context of cultural factors, tool making, language, need for communication, and social gatherings and social groups, that I'm going to add a little bit more emphasis on this in a bit. Plus, this is one for better hand coordination. And then language. How did language develop? What areas? If you want to specifically cite what areas have developed. For this, I would like to show you this particular image. So this is called Broca's area. If you see in this gray region, the cerebral cortex, you notice an area called Broca's area. So this seems to be responsible for producing coherent speech. This region is responsible for producing coherent speech, being able to comprehend and speak coherently. So this is not present in the other apes. So this Broca's area developed, this is specific to us. Helps in producing coherent speech. So you can mention these 2 areas. One is Broca's area, responsible for coherent speech. Second area is called Wernicke's area. Wernicke's. If you can remember, great. If you don't remember, mention certain areas related to produce coherent speech and speech processing and understanding language as developed in humans. Broca's area you can mention, Wernicke's area you can mention for producing coherent speech and for speech processing and understanding language. Excuse me. Okay. So these are very specific changes that we are talking about in the brain. Very specific changes that we are talking about in the brain that allowed certain changes, certain cultural things to be possible. So which is first? Changes in the brain is first or cultural changes first? Difficult to answer. But looks like they both happened hand in hand. There was a need for better coordination, need for communication, need for tool making, for survival. But to satisfy those needs, changes had to happen in the brain. So they both probably simultaneously happened and helped each other to develop further. Okay. Excuse me. So how social and culture approach has affected our evolution? One second, I'll be on mute for 1 minute. Sorry. Right. So here we're talking about what cultural aspects further uh, played a role in our evolution. So here we're talking about, we have immense variety of things that we see in our culture, like type of social organizations. So after this topic, I'm going to deal with primate behavior. There we are going to understand our similarities with apes. But we definitely see that we have different ways of organizing ourselves. Social organization is different. The group sizes, starting from our ancestors, tribals, and to modern people, the group sizes have also varied quite a bit. How do we live together? In what size of groups do we live together? This kind of inherited from, in a way, from the primates culture also you can see it. In ape culture also you can see it. Kinship structures, mating patterns. So you study this in social anthropology. We have wide, diverse range of approaches that we took for this. So which requires, this diversity requires, a lot of relevant changes in our brain to make this possible. Either it is social organization, group sizes, kinships, mating patterns. These are all should be supported by changes that happen in our body, including brain. Okay, so this culturally acquired changes that we are seeing here, so they probably worked based on certain social rules. They probably work based on certain social rules. What are they? So like whom to marry, for example. So selection of the mate choice. So group sizes, mate choice, these have influenced our genetic diversity. And also this could be reflected in terms of cultural approaches that we have taken. So social attitudes of mate choice, who to marry and who not to marry, was defined by our cultural beliefs, correct? Our social structure. So what happened? Because of that, we were defining the dynamics of genetic changes in us. So this also contributed to the evolution of us. So slowly what happened? Given the culture has been established, culture starting influencing the evolution. So the learning ability, being able to transfer the knowledge to the coming generations, They all became possible because of this structure that we had. And also our feelings and beliefs on population growth. So population dynamics, we talked about in Hardy-Weinberg law, random mating population, and there should be no specific selection. But these are all affected by our culture, our feelings and beliefs. Different religions have different belief or concept related to the population growth. And birth control was allowed in some religion, was not allowed in some religions that we were talking about, infertility factors. And abortion, is it allowed or not allowed? So like that, they all affected reproductive fitness. So indirectly, culturally, we also influenced our evolution through these practices, through our beliefs, through our social structures, and our mating patterns. They all affected reproductive fitness, especially population growth, birth control, whether it is allowed to abort the baby or not. These beliefs have also slowly shaped the evolution. Okay, and other things I talked to you about. Learning from others seems to be a very, very important component. This is a cultural evolutionary process. So as we adapt to new technologies, new tools, this has to be taught to the coming generations. This has to be shared, for which, as I was telling you, development in communication became a necessity. So this learning led to the cultural evolutionary process. Learning, concept, teaching process, communication process led to cultural evolutionary process. That is why it's very difficult, which is first. So I think they both helped each other to develop. We have certain cultures because we are able to talk, we are able to communicate, we are able to set rules. That happened because of the increase in complexity of our brains. Okay. So these processes, our culture has also influenced the natural selection process and the area that natural selection is acting on. Because you're not letting natural selection to act in the normal way. We started introducing changes to our behavior. So natural selection and the natural selection that is acting on the environment is changed. So we started introducing or influencing the concept of natural selection in evolution. So how else is our evolution affected? So we are changing the environment through our behavior and culture. Transport is another thing. Transport made it possible for people to travel around the world, and what is called meet and mate had happened. So they were traveling, like warriors, for example, or traders, for example. We talked about race mixing and race crossing. That can also be mentioned here with respect to the changes in evolution, cultural factors in evolution. So transport had led to marriages outside the areas that were usually common. So reproductive isolation had diminished because of that. There was no reproductive isolation. There was more and more access to people living in different geographical areas and led to changes in our gene frequencies. We studied in Hardy-Weinberg law. Gene and genotypic frequencies have changed because of this. More mixing had taken place. More gene pool exchanges have taken place. Okay, so see different angles. Need for learning to share information, changing the environment, and reducing reproductive isolation. And survivability has also changed due to technological intervention, medical intervention. Otherwise, what would have happened? People with diseases were dying. Huge number of people were dying from infectious diseases in those days. But because of the knowledge of medicinal plants, we started exploring. Because of the complexity of the brain, we started exploring the features of the plants, benefits of the plants. We found medicinal plants around us in the forest and started using them to treat human infections and other ailments. We started treating human infections and other ailments, thereby increasing the increasing the life expectancy and decreasing the pressure by natural selection. Because we have to let all these things happen naturally for evolution to take its own course. But as humans, as we have complex brains, we started intervening in them. How? We found medicinal plants that can cure our problems, thereby reducing the pressure of natural selection. And here in the cultural context, you can also mention about our diet, our food habits. We used to initially eat the meat and the plant material that was available in the forest. So diet changes have also influenced changes in our bodies, changes in evolution. How? So what you are eating defined your dentition pattern, correct? So apes, for example, had components that were actually suitable for eating. Some, of course, majority of them were vegetarians, occasional meat eaters they were. So they could also eat ants, they could also eat meat. So dentition was adjusted according to that. But we have seen in the facial remodeling, our teeth have decreased. We don't need to eat raw meat anymore. We eat cooked meat. We eat processed foods. Need for having those big jaws and big teeth has decreased. That is also, there is a cultural connection to that because diet changes in our diet from more raw meat and vegetables, of course, fruits and vegetables, to cooked versions of the food, processed versions of the food, and cooked versions of the food. So need for having that big teeth has gone. So altogether shaped the structure that we have. Pelvic changes in the face happen together to satisfy the requirements of, in this particular case, the diet. You can also mention this factor as part of cultural factors. So like that, these behavioral changes, cultural changes, so ever accumulating cultural elements have driven our brain's expansion. So simultaneously, these changes could allow more brain changes in brain, and changes in brain could allow more cultural factors. So they both were supporting the changes that we are seeing in biological sense as well as in the cultural sense. So like that, through the ever accumulating cultural elements, probably would have driven our brain expansion, our cognitive specialization, our ability to think, our ability to coordinate, plan, execute. These were not part of the animal kingdom, other animals, right? In primates, we don't see so much of planning that happens. Here, our cognitive abilities have increased, have expanded. Social psychology, social psychology. Our social behavior is defined by our abilities provided by the brain, our communication, method of communication. So these things have influenced social psychology. And physiological changes, as I was telling you already, changes happen in our various body parts. Our gut digestive system has changed. Depending on what we eat, do you think we can digest grass now? Do we have teeth designed to chew grass? No. If you see the dentition of the cow, it has those flat and required dentition pattern to chew grass. That is not the case with us. Right? Our teeth got remodeled. Our hands got remodeled because now we want to use hands for other things. Animals were not using hands. We were actually reduced use of teeth for fighting. Instead, we have hands to fight and coordinate, protect ourselves when needed in dangers. Our guts has changed. Our enzymes have changed. We don't have any more cellulases. Enzymes to break down the grass is gone. Okay, teeth got remodeled, hands got remodeled, our bones got remodeled. So all these changes are in connection with cultural factors have also happened. So you have to describe these aspects: biological changes, cultural factors that led to these changes, especially changes in the brain. Okay, right. This is about what is partly given in 1.4a, biological and cultural factors in human evolution. What drove human evolution to where we are today? So these are all the biological and cultural factors. Okay, they're also part of differences that we have on primate characteristics and differences we have from apes to us. I've given brain changes in terms of changes in brain. Here, I've also given some changes in culture as well here. Next, we'll move on to primate behavior. After this, we'll move on to primate behavior. Some of the aspects we again touched here, but I'm going to put into the context of what needs to be written. If they ask you to write a note on primate behavior, what aspects have to be written? So we're going to cover the next subheading, that is primate behavior here. So for primate behavior, we have to talk about various different, because in the features, we mostly focus on anatomical features. Here we have to focus on behavioral features. Okay, so what type of behavioral feature? I think first thing is locomotion. I think I've seen a question on this in the last exam, where they talked about specifically on locomotory patterns of primates. So primates exhibit wide range of locomotory patterns. There's a huge range of changes that you notice in primates. For this, I think a nice table is given in the Steinen row that I want you to refer to. So the first behavioral component here is the primate. In the primate behavior is the locomotory patterns. The first part of this chapter talks about this behavior. So look at this nicely laid out table. So this is called primates locomotory patterns. So here they have given what locomotory pattern is found in what type of living examples. Okay, bit of an idea. Okay, and what type of skeletal changes have happened in them. So what are the different ways that they travel or they walk? Okay, so starting with something really simple that you probably see here. Slow climbing. Some primates prefer to slowly climb onto the trees, especially many primitive prosimians, primitive monkeys, nocturnal prosimians, where animals prefer to move slowly and cautiously through the branches. They preferred using slow climbing method. Slow climbing method. So what happens in slow climbing method? Slow moving on the tree branches takes place. This is found in nocturnal prosimians, or simply you write prosimians because majority of them are nocturnal. So prosimians use what is called a slow climbing method. Their body, their spinal cord is designed to satisfy this requirement. The next one is brachiation. 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 So what is brachiation? Brachiation is moving from like using the arm like this. Okay, holding the branches like this and moving on them like this by switching the arms. So body is suspended or dropped down from above, and what they are doing is arm swinging. They're swinging with the help of arms. Okay, arm swinging, these are the keywords, and move rapidly hand over hand. Okay, they hold on with one hand and then switch to another hand. Like that, they're able to move forward on the branches. This is called brachiation, which is seen in gibbons and siamonks. They're seen in gibbons and siamong. There's so many examples are given. We are going to just focus on selected ones here. So within this is a true brachiation where they are actually moving like this, which is seen in gibbons and simonks. There's also something called semi-brachiation. Semi-brachiation that you notice. So this is also type of branch running and walking. This is also type of moving on the branches. But here they mostly use the leaping process. So what do? Instead of the true brachiation where they move with the help of hands, here they use great deal of leaping, meaning great deal of jumping they use here. So we notice our the monkeys, langurs in India, right? These langurs actually tend to spend a lot of time on the trees. They spend considerable amount of time under the branches. Okay, and they use this semi-brachiation method because these are old world monkeys, so it is also called old world semi-brachiation. It is seen in langurs and other monkeys called colobus monkeys, tiny monkeys, colobus monkeys, colobus and langurs. They show this type of approach. Okay, there is again slight difference between old brachiation and new world brachiation. They both semi-brachiation methods. Okay, but in new world, remember new world monkeys have prehensile tails, right? So the difference in semi-brachiation between old world and new world is in new world they use prehensile tails. They use prehensile tails for brachiation process. They can hold on with the tail as well. They can hang on with the tails. This is called semi-brachiation method. Okay, new world semi-brachiation method. The difference here is the prehensile tail being present in the new world monkeys and their use here. Uses prehensile tail for suspending its body under branches. This is called new world semi-brachiation. Okay, new world monkeys like spider monkeys follow this. So they have the skeletal system with the tail helps in this process. Okay, otherwise you notice simple branch running and branch walking. Several primates, including lemurs, okay, other type of monkeys, what do? They are able to walk on the branches. So this is very simple version of it. They can walk, climb, jump, leap among the branches and using its hands and feet. So mostly what do they use? Instead of hanging on to the branches, they walk on them, they jump on them, they hold on to them. So this type of method is simple branch running and walking method seen in many of the primates like lemurs. So what type of skeletal systems? So basically longer legs help in this process, longer legs, and also long fingers and toes and opposable thumb. These things help in holding on to the branches, properly balancing on the branches with the help of tails. So some of the features that we discussed already help in this process of branch running and branch walking. Okay, so far we talked about slow climbing, brachiation, different versions of brachiation. We talked about ground running and walking. Sorry, not ground running, branch running and walking. Similarly, same thing, some monkeys prefer to walk on the ground. Like baboons do this, baboons. So they prefer to walk on the grounds. They're more terrestrial. One reason I was telling you is size. Terrestrial primates are bigger. So they can't safely stand on the branches easily. So terrestrial primates, which are larger than the arboreal ones, they prefer this type of ground running and walking. So because they move on the flat surfaces, many of the qualities or characteristics of holding onto the branches is not needed here. So that is why if you notice their Fingers size has decreased. They have shorter fingers. They don't need long fingers anymore for walking on the flat surfaces. Okay. So a couple of changes have happened here. So they're walking on the flat surface. The size of the digits have decreased, and also arms and legs are more or less of the same size. There's not too much of difference in arms and legs. The size is more or less similar. So slight proportionality changes have happened. Excuse me. Okay, what else? The other method of movement is vertical clinging and leaping. So clinging, basically climbing onto the trees branches and trees trunks and holding onto them is called vertical clinging and leaping. They're holding onto the branches as you see and trunks as you see here. And they can leap. In the process, they use long legs to leap, to jump onto the trunks. Tarsiers, for example, and other primates can do this. Okay, right. So what else I think is important? I think otherwise climbing, true brachiation. Sometimes again I'm skipping this quadrumanous. They use all four components to move around. Semi brachiation, we normally they use two hands, right? Something similar to that, they use quadrumanous where they use all four. Slowly using feet as well as hands they move like orangutans do this. Orangutans. This is called quadrumanous. Quadrumanous. You can skip this but be familiar because if they ask something like the last exam like this, you require specific numbers of them. Otherwise, another important one is knuckle walking. This is something that we frequently hear is knuckle walking. Chimpanzees and gorillas, what do is they walk on their knuckles because they have long arms, right? So if they have to walk on the 4 feet, what do? Because of the given size difference, they have to knuckle, they have to fold their wrists at the wrist like this. So they walk on this. They don't walk on the fingers. They basically walk on the knuckles. They fold it like this and walk on the knuckles. You see it here? They fold their wrists here and walk on them. These are called knuckles. The animals moves effectively on the trees usually, but on the ground, because of the long arms, the body is held an angle with respect to the ground and they use the knuckles. So instead of using the palms, they use knuckles. So chimpanzees, gorillas, this is a very common method of walking. This is called knuckle walking. So correlate that with the longer arms here. Right. We already talked about humans, erect bipedalism. I don't have to describe it. You can also mention about bipedalism in humans. And already I described about this concept. So you can briefly talk about how bipedalism works and changes that happen related to that. Okay, this is about the locomotory pattern in their behavior. How do they walk around? How do they go around? Next, we'll talk about social structure and behavior. Okay, so these in social structure, one common thing that you notice with many of these primates is they prefer to live in groups and the group size changes. So most of the primates, they prefer to live in groups. They spend time or they live together in large social groups or communities, including us. We don't live alone, correct? So primates also, many of the apes also live or prefer to live in groups, but the size of the groups may vary. Sometimes, like the case with baboons, they prefer to live in large communities, large groups. What is the benefit of being in large groups? Protection. So if they're in the large groups, enemies don't try to or attempt to attack them. So large groups provide security, protection. But similarly, large groups may not be useful during the food shortages. If there's a large group to satisfy the food requirements, there is more demand for it. Correct? Understand the connection here. Large groups are preferable for protection. Small groups are preferable when there is scarcity in the food resources. Like, for example, there are some leaf eaters like colobus monkeys and langurs. They don't prefer to live in large groups because they reduce the competition. If they reduce the size of the group, competition for the food also gets decreased. So group sizes change here, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. They have their own advantages and disadvantages. I'll give you some idea of how different apes or primates live, in what size groups they live. Bit of an expansion on what I'm talking about here. I told you so far, bigger and smaller groups have their own advantages. Okay, like for example, so you notice orangutans. They live as a single female and her offspring. Social group pattern usually one female and her children. They prefer to live in small groups like this, where single female with the offsprings lives together. Orangutans, it is the case, and many other things like lemurs, for example, and nocturnal prosimians, lemurs, even some humans live like that. So single female lives with its children. This is the case with orangutans and other lemurs and humans, etc. So I'm telling you range of behavior here. Next, monogamous family group. Monogamous family group, meaning two parents, one father, one mother. Monogamous relationship they are into. Sometimes we hear the word pair bonded relationships. I don't know if you study them in social anthropology, pair bonding. They're pair bonded to each other. There is more connection to the male and female. So what happens? They prefer the monogamous relationship here. So monogamous family groups, some new world monkeys, and some prosimians, and gibbons and siamongs, and humans most commonly prefer monogamous family groups for various societal reasons. We notice humans as well as gibbons and siamongs and some monkeys, new world monkeys. So they follow monogamous family groups, one father, one mother, and children. And you see different variations to that. Polyandrous family group also you notice. Okay, you notice two versions here. One male, several females. One male, several females. And one female, several males. So polyandrous family group and one male, several female. So polygyny, polyandrous groups also you notice here. Some smallest new world monkeys and some human tribal groups, you notice this features that where polyandrous behavior. One female, multiple males live together, or one male, several females live together. Polygyny. Some baboons, langurs prefer this. One male, several females. Langurs we might watch, correct? So you see few males and many females around. Otherwise, gorillas and some humans also have this tendency. So like that, multi-male, multi-female groups are also there. Several males, several females living in a group are also there. Old world monkeys like baboons, colobus monkeys show this. Okay, you don't have to by heart all of them. Remember a few examples, like I highlighted some of them. Orangutans prefer single female and children. Some new world monkeys like gibbons and siamongs. There are old world monkeys like Asian apes prefer monogamous family relationship. Some new world monkeys prefer polyandrous. Okay, some baboons prefer one male, several female groups. And also multi-male, multi-female groups are also seen in old world monkeys and also savanna baboons. Okay, chimpanzees prefer fission-fusion societies. So meaning they change. They may together fusion societies, or they may, kind of go away from each other. So a lot of dynamic groups that we're talking about, fission-fusion societies where dynamics change. Like that, the social pattern of their survival is different. So we talked about locomotory pattern. We're talking about social groups here. Okay, a lot of variations that you may see, like not only the size of the groups, we talked about size of the groups, whether they are open to the other groups or not. Okay, so many of them are closed. They don't let the other new members to join. So what happens, more or less groups are closed. So they don't let the newcomers to join their groups. They're restricted. So they have a closed groups preferably, and they prefer to live within a known region. They are tied to or restricted to particular location and rarely migrate outside their home range because of the protection issues. Unless there is scarcity of food, they prefer to live within their known region. So they know the regions better, there is a better protection, and there's closed groups. But what happens if they come across each other? If they come across different groups, how do they behave? So communities usually avoid each other. They prefer not to run into each other. They avoid them. They see the signs of other animals, other groups of primates coming there, they go away. So they usually avoid. And if they come together, they're aggressive. They show aggressive behavior to the outsiders. They don't let them join. So they show aggressive pattern. Usually, there are exceptions to this. They're aggressive towards the outsiders. Okay. And because of this closed nature, usually there is no interaction between the different troops. The male mates don't look for female mates in the other groups. Usually they don't, because of this protective layer. Interactions between members of different troops are usually very rare, especially for females. They protect their females. They don't let the other partners to join. But with an exception with chimpanzees. What happens in chimpanzees? When chimpanzees come across the other troops, okay, they actually feel excited. It's like, finding a new life, a new features on an island, right? They get excited, and they usually have friendly encounters for several hours. So there's a lot of communication that happens. They get excited, and this is when they switch adult to females. Those that seeking new mates, they get switched here. That behavior is seen in chimpanzees. They are a bit more open, more friendly encounters, and also switching of females looking for new mates also happen here. But the problem is sometimes they fight for the females. There will be genocidal violence that happens. They fight and they kill each other in the process. In animal kingdom, you usually see that. They actually show their power. Size matters, their strength matters. That is why sometimes in some groups, the robust and strong males run the groups. Why? Because they are able to fight and win the games. So you see this type of nature very common in primates as well. Okay, so this is social structure and the behavioral aspects related to that. Then few other components that we're going to talk here. So what do they do in their behavior? When we notice monkeys, a certain behavior pattern that we usually notice. So what is that pattern? What are the common features you notice in them? So to increase their reproductive success, which is a requirement for every living being, every living species, what do? They follow these methods. They show care to the other animals. They show care, they show competition. They can be aggressive in protecting their female partner. And they cooperate. Grooming is a very common theme that you notice in monkeys, right? They all sit and groom each other. So grooming, care, competition are the three things that you usually notice to increase the reproductive success. Otherwise, female partners may not prefer them if no care is given, if they're not able to protect them from other, partners, okay, or competitors, and if there's no cooperation. So in the primate kingdom, so because humans do most of these, but already other primates, primitive primates, have this ability or these features seen in them. Okay, and also they invest so much of time for offspring, especially females. You notice that females spend a lot of time with their children. So more care results in higher chance of survival. You see in this particular case, golden monkey or langurs, we notice, or other type of monkeys we see in India, we clearly see that females hold on to the children. They provide enough care. So survival rate, this is very important. Not only having children, but being able to protect them is very important in animal kingdom. Okay, but often what do we see? This is very much like humans. But care for present infant reduces the ability to care for older infants and future infants. They're caring for these infants, what happens? They won't conceive again. So they will not be able to give rise to new children, new progeny. So this is kind of a trade-off. Whether you want to protect the existing children or you want to have new children. That all depends on the dynamics and the scenario of how well they can protect them. So mothers normally get the trade-off. So what do? They prefer to have few very high quality offsprings. Okay, they want to have few high quality offsprings and nurture them rather than having many low quality offsprings. They prefer that. Okay, so like that, primate mothers invest heavily on each offspring and prefer to have very few of them. So that is in terms of size of the babies and protection. Pair bonded species, as I was telling you, the pair bonding. So marmosets and tamarins, if you see, they are male reproductive success is tied with mate's reproductive success. So reproductive success is defined by both of them. So they're pair bonded. The concept here, they're more connected to each other. They're more reliable to each other. Mostly seen in monogamous relationships. So you can say humans are pair bonded. Okay, there is more reliability on each other here. They carry infants, they share food with infants, and males guards females from rivals. So they're closely bonded. They spend time together. Like titi monkeys, owl monkeys, okay, some gibbons and siamongs, they prefer this type of pair bonded nature. Strong association between a male and a female. Some rarely you also notice some extreme things happening there. What are they? Infanticide. To improve their reproductive success, they show infanticide. They kill infants of the other females. Langurs are very well known for this. Infanticide is well known in the langurs that we see in India. So what do normally do? Females nurse infants for many months. So they will not conceive because of that, as I was already telling you. So if unweaned infant dies, female resumes cycling immediately. If unweaning means not feeding the baby, what happens? Baby dies, infant dies, and now its normal life cycle begins, reproductive cycle begins. But what do? Some of these animals, they realize this and they attack the babies and kill them so that the reproductive cycle of the female begins there. Is it good or bad? I think it doesn't sound very ethical to us, right? So why do we have such practices? We see such practices in animal kingdom like that. So one reasoning they say, if that animal, that male is able to kill from that group, meaning it is showing its ability, it is strong enough. So it makes sense that for that female to have children from that male, so that a better and more stronger animals gets created. So this seems to be the reasoning, theoretical reasoning that they normally give behind the infanticide. But infanticide is seen in some creatures like that, in some primates. Langur is an example for that. And that allows the female to come back to the normal reproductive cycle and have babies. And more stronger babies because of the males that overtake them. Okay, what else? So quickly I'll go on with the other few points and we'll wind up. So vocalization and communication also you can mention under behavior. How do they communicate with each other? How do they talk to each other? Many primates use rich vocalization. Okay, so they do make sounds, different ranges of sounds they make, along with touch and facial expressions. They also provide different facial expressions. You always see this, right? You go close to monkey, it will greet you with a special facial expression. It will tell you, don't come close to me, right? It will give that, it will try to scare you. So these type of expressions, as you see here in the monkey, and more vigorous here. So facial expression, touch, vocalization they use. Lemurs, lorises, tarsiers, and New World monkeys rely on olfactory. They're more primitive, right? They prefer using olfaction signals, smelling signals. Okay, related to their reproductive behavior, they use smells. Gibbons, for example, vocalizations are most complex and loud. Gibbons, they're actually very loud. They can show how aggressive they are. Okay, and most primate species use threatening gestures, stares, and make them intimidated. They show the aggressiveness to the others so that they can get scared of them. They go away from their groups, for example. So you see a lot of care. I was already telling you with the touch, holding to them, carrying the babies, and facial gestures, and sometimes more aggressive gestures like gibbons show. So this is a common communication that you notice. So already told you about grooming, the activity practiced among primates, especially in the prosimians to the greater apes, where grooming does. So they pick up the dirt, they pick up the skin flakes, they pick up the parasites. So grooming is a very common thing. Okay, and also I was telling you affiliative behavior or aggression. Sometimes they show aggression towards the other members. Sometimes within the groups also they show aggression to show their strength. However, to minimize the actual violence and to diffuse potentially dangerous situations, there are many behaviors that reinforce the bonds between individuals. So if one is aggressive, is strong enough, the other one slows down, calms down. Okay, you see that kind of survival nature retrospective to what we notice in the other animals. Altruism. You also notice altruism, altruistic act where they involve some risk of sacrificing to the performer to protect others from attackers. So what do? They protect their own group members by attacking the others, by taking the risk. So it is called altruism. So when predators attack them, they prefer to sacrifice or take some amount of risk to protect the others. So what else? Tools use. This is also something really important. Something like chimpanzees, they know how to use tools, some basic tools. Like for example, you may notice in one of the chapter that some chimpanzees hold on to tiny tree twigs, twig of the tree to fish the termites. Small ants or termites, what do? They poke into the hole of them so they can pick up the termites. So some of them effectively use the tiny tools, which are parts of the plants like twigs, to probe something like termite fishing. In addition to termite fishing, the range of chimpanzee cultural behaviors include nest building, hunting, throwing sticks, throwing stones as weapons. So this behavior is also seen in some of these primates. So like that, we talked about the range of these things. We talked about their locomotion, social structure and behavior, and groups. We talked about their behavior to introduce or increase or enhance reproductive success, pair bonded species, infanticide, we talked about, vocalization, variety of vocalization, communication, we briefly talked about, and some miscellaneous ones, altruism, we talked about, tool use, we talked about, and finally the diet. So I was telling you, I think briefly, most of the apes are herbivores, they eat plants for the most part, but some of them rarely eat some animals and bugs. Otherwise, usually they are herbivores. Gibbons, for example, mostly eat fruits, leaves, flowers, and rarely insects. So mostly they are vegetarians. They eat plant-based foods, but rarely they eat small animals and insects. Orangutans prefer fruit diet along with vegetation. Some invertebrates they eat. Okay, mineral-rich soil they eat. Small vertebrates they eat. So the orangutans prefer mostly the fruit-based diet plus some small animals. Chimpanzees' diet is also mainly fruit supplemented with insects, birds, and small mammals. Like that mixed pattern that you see from vegetarianism to animal meat, eating insects and animal meat, small animals usually. They don't hunt too much, but small animals they can eat sometimes. Okay, right. This is what about their behavior that we talked about, range of behaviors. So with that, we finished most of the 1.5 parts, leaving out tertiary and quaternary fossil primates. So in tomorrow's session, what I'm going to do, I'm going to begin with this part of the 1.5, showing you what is tertiary period, quaternary period. There I'm going to talk to you about different eras and epochs in our evolution and evolutionary periods. And there I'm going to briefly tell you examples of tertiary. So very small amount of information I'm going to talk about on tertiary, but our focus will be quaternary, which is the unit 1.6. Briefly, I'll tell you what are tertiary fossils, quaternary fossils, how do they fit in the timeline of evolution. I'm going to give terminology on that, idea on that, and then few examples of tertiary fossils, and then our focus will be mostly on the quaternary fossils, so 1.6. So a brief introduction to 1.6 along with the 1.5, connecting the 1.5, 1.6 happens here. Okay, right. So
how many more classes?
2 sessions. So brief intro, and we'll move on to the first quaternary fossils A and B tomorrow, and we'll wind up the class in the next session. So 2 more sessions, we're going to wind this up. Okay, right, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I'm going to provide some reading on behavior. Otherwise, the remaining characteristics I've already sent you the content yesterday. Okay, right. Thank you.